My guest on this episode is Andrew Wittstadt, writer, poet, and host of the podcast Heavy Board, where Andrew interviews writers about their work and hosts conversations with writers about great books. Recent episodes you might be interested in include an in-depth discussion on Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain with Maggie Zhu, an interview with author and filmmaker Josh Mendoza centered on his novel Shadow of the Eternal Watcher, and a great interview with Jasper Ceylon on his controversial Echolalia review project. You can find Andrew on Twitter or Substack at Andrew Wittstadt, or look for his podcast Heavy Board wherever you get your podcasts.
Have you ever heard about Willie the Weeper? Had a job as a chimney sweeper. He had the dope habit and he had it bad. Listen while I tell you about a dream he had.
I think everybody's got kind of a love-hate relationship with it, you know. I, at one point, was like, I don't ever want to learn how to use a new piece of software. I know all of the software that I need to know to function in my daily, and you know, here I am again, like learning
new software.
Yeah. But it's, you know, it's different when it's like to a means to an end to do something you want to do.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, like in the workplace, there's just like, oh, hey, you got to put it on Glorp now. Everything's got to get uploaded to Glorp, and you're like, I don't need another thing.
And technical writing too. Like there's like all these different softwares that come out every 2 years, and everybody switches over, and you have to learn. Like, use Madcap Flare. I'm like, okay, like pick one, guys. Like this one worked fine. Right. Why are we switching the entire system? Right. But you mentioning that, I think something that'd be interesting to talk about is kind of the intimacy of podcasting and social media. You know, people call it parasocial, and that's true. Yeah. Like there is that. But it is this strange. You know, I started talking about this with a mutual of ours, Brendan from Tales from the Mall podcast, and this was probably last year now. We recorded a few episodes together, and I was just thinking, like, how he was talking about how people start jumping to this level of intimacy with you when you have a podcast or you have a following on social media or something. And I was just thinking to myself, yeah, you know, it is intimate. Like we're not, obviously we're talking to each other, but like there is a broader audience here that's listening, and we don't know who they are, but they know our likes, our dislikes, they know our tastes in literature. Like they know, like even if you talk about your domestic life and stuff, you know, spouses and stuff, they know about that, your boyfriends, your girlfriends, all of that stuff. And then people get upset when they like jump to this level of intimacy where it's like, well, they do know you probably better than some people in your life know you, because you're saying things on this podcast that you wouldn't say in real life to anybody. Yeah. And I think on social media too, where you're confessing these types of things, like it kind of incentivizes confession, and then all of a sudden you're upset when people think they know you on a very intimate level, which is complicated because they don't really know you on an intimate level, but then they also kind of do. You know, it's this very strange thing in social media, and especially if you're trying to be like somebody doing it in public like we are. I don't know. It's something I've been thinking about. I don't know. Yeah, what do you think of that?
Yeah. I mean, it's super interesting, and like I've met people in person who've listened to the podcast, you know, and
fucking freaks.
It's always, it's always been super cool. It's been like, it's always been super friendly and super cool. And but there is, meeting those people in person, it does sort of draw it home. You're like, oh yeah, these people listen to you, like they've heard you a lot, you know, and
any little thing in passing, like little conversation you had with your wife or something, just anything they know about it and they remember it.
And it's kind of cool, but you know, I think in a way it's like it's sort of a sublimated version of like one of the reasons. Sort of subconscious reasons I probably even started doing this to begin with, because if I talk in my personal life with the people around me that I love, my good friends and my family, if I talk about the stuff I talk about on the podcast, it's not that it's like causes problems. It's just there's just not that much interest. It's going to be sort of like we're going to, well, you know, just like you entertain any friend. If you've got a friend who's into some like obscure sport and they come to you and they talk about it, you sort of entertain it and ask some questions, but ultimately you don't really care that much. So that's what literary conversations are like mostly in my personal life, right? So oddly enough, you kind of got to like practically start a business to like find some people that you might be able to interact with. So I get to have these conversations with people like you, and then that conversation is, you know, sort of broader to other people as well. And it's really cool that way. I think you could overthink it for sure and get in your own head about it, and maybe that's why a lot of people don't do it or aren't interested in it. I don't know. I mean, tell me the story of how Heavy Board started and why you started it and how, I guess.
Yeah, basically, my go-to answer for this question is always like desperation. I was desperate. I was out of my MFA. When you realize when you get out of your MFA is that there aren't a whole lot of options, especially career-wise, with that degree specifically. In terms of you could pivot to other things, but you really can't. There are no jobs for an MFA graduate. So anyway, I was just desperate. You kind of lose that. Like we were just saying, like when you're in college and you can kind of have these endless conversations in grad school about books and stuff and your tastes and all of that, the literary canon, and that's a lot of fun to people that are into it. But then there's really no place for that outside of the academy. And of course, to get a job in the academy is more difficult than getting jobs in most other places. So it's, I don't know, it was just desperation. I wanted to have a place where I could go and talk to people like you, like my original co-hosts, like all the guests that I've had on, et cetera, about books and take it seriously too. Like, because I mean, it's fun to do that on social media and stuff, but it's also like you do reach a limit. Whereas like, we can have, multiple hours long conversations about a book or something, and it just is a more enriching experience than going back and forth in like social media comments or something, or like, short form snarky replies. Like you could do that on podcasts, and there are some podcasts that do that. But I mean, for literature and books, it really doesn't work in that format. Yeah. You kind of have to do a long form, explain it. And I don't know, I just needed an outlet like that. So I started the podcast, and it's been just over 3 years now. And of course there's been ups and downs, but yeah, basically desperation for maybe I would say a literary community, or just a place for it to be done seriously, and maybe without all the stuffiness of academia too. That's always been kind of, not that I'm anti-academic, but definitely if I could nudge the academy in a different direction, I would,
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting. So that, I mean, this is Heavy Board started it as a COVID project, or a COVID era project for you, which I think is super interesting. I probably said this elsewhere, but I do think, like, for COVID, it was most people either like started some new thing or finally got going on some new creative thing, or became like an alcoholic. I think there's sort of like those two routes. And
a lot like being a writer, yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think when COVID started, I think I had 50 followers on Twitter, and I was never logged in, So, and now, it's totally different. I have a totally different.
Now you're an addict, and
yeah, exactly. But you're right about the podcast versus social media, because Twitter or Substack, which I don't use quite as often, but there's definitely a takes. It's all about the takes, the pithy take, which is super cool. It's just the different mediums are for different purposes, and I think that's sort of worth recognizing.
And I'm also starting to wonder. No, sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I'm also wondering, like, especially recently, the way the algorithms have changed, the way social media even works as a promotional tool has changed. It's pay to play. The algorithms are not going to just boost you like they used to even 5 years ago because you have a viral hot take. It has to be this kind of pay to play thing. I don't know. It just feels like social media is different than it once was too. Like it's you're not getting
not
what
even
you used
that
to
long
get.
ago.
Exactly. It was less than 5 years. Yeah. Even I've had things go viral on there and stuff too, and you get like 5 subscribers after 5.5 million views, and it's just okay.
No, I've noticed.
What's the point of this?
It seems harder to get. I mean, I don't want to be in one of those people like, I'm getting throttled or something. I don't understand how it works. I don't pretend to know how it works, but like, it does seem like it's harder to get followers than it used to be.
Oh yeah.
I don't know.
I'm just not like, I'll literally get notifications almost every day that I have new followers, and the number goes down, of actual followers. Like, I don't understand what's happening.
It
seems totally rigged. Yeah.
So there's this thing where you're like, how much am I in the simulacrum? Like, to what extent is any of this real? I think maybe that's one of the kind of the cool things about podcasts, especially you see, I see people I've had on go on shows I've been on. Obviously, there's a sort of literature adjacent podcast sort of scene, and there is something about people from different parts of it, or you recognize from different parts of it, like being on an episode together, like, oh, these are actually real people. Okay. So it sort of confirms that they actually exist, and they're not just some packet of data floating around Twitter or Substack or whatever. So that's always kind of cool. I want to turn the heavy board question on you, because I've been listening to heavy board off and on since I came across you a year. I don't remember when, 2 years ago now, maybe, or more. But obviously listening a little bit more regularly ahead of this conversation. And you always ask people to talk about their childhood. And I realized I don't know anything about Andrew's childhood. So I'm going to throw that question at you and see how you like it, I guess.
Yeah, I always describe my childhood as picture perfect. Essentially, it was the American epitome, like the stuff you see depicted in movies. Nice. It literally was, and that's one of the reasons I do ask it. Is I think particularly for millennials, and this isn't. Obviously, there are people that have terrible childhoods and all that, but I always say like the majority of people especially if you're a millennial, you grew up in this kind of suburban environment, unless, you grew up in like New York City or something like that. Most people grew up in this kind of suburban environment, and it was incredibly safe, loving, doting parents, really never needed or wanted for anything. I grew up kind of in this strange kind of mostly middle class and upper middle class kind of thing. My father was a surgeon for 35 years in Baltimore, where I grew up. He's retired now. My mother was a nurse in very different, various different ways. Started working in the kind of the infants with, newborns and things like that when she was young. Worked in the ER and all of that. And then eventually, once she had kids, kind of took a back seat and then went back to being like a school nurse for the county. And she did that for a while. But yeah, I always say I had two siblings. I was the middle child. I had an older sister, younger brother, and it was picture perfect. There was literally, of course, there were always ups and downs and like emotionally and things, but no actual issues. Like I had loving parents. I never had like an absent father or anything like that. It was picture perfect. And I don't know, I like to ask people that question too, especially writers, because I feel like everybody pretends that their life was worse than it was to get some type of credit or credibility for being like a dark, fucked up individual, I like writing or whatever, I like poetry. And maybe that was true for maybe like the Hemingway era, where you had, your siblings would just die. I think even like my grandparents, like they would tell me stories, they had like 9 siblings or something, and like half of them died before they reached age of 5. So that was the reality until, the boomer generation, basically. And then we just kind of, everybody had idyllic American childhoods growing up in the suburbs. I don't know. I like to ask about that. I think it gives people a little bit of an answer to, I guess the reason people ask that question usually is, where does the creativity come from? Where does the darkness, if you write dark shit, come from? And it's always just kind of like, I don't know. And people try to blame it on their childhood. They're like, oh, like I hated my dad or something. It's like, well, that wasn't me. That isn't most people writing today either. So I don't know. I like to ask that question and just kind of dispel that myth of you have to be some kind of awful, fucked up person like Bukowski or whatever in order to write good fiction or good poetry. And it's just not true, Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's there's example. Obviously there's examples on all sides of it, but it isn't a requirement. Well, and part of the reason I think is like, even in a pretty uneventful or untraumatic life, there's plenty of like pain if you know how to look at it, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's not. There's and yes, it's for maybe a person who grew up like you. The worst thing that ever happened isn't quite the same as somebody else who's had awful things happen. But there's still ways to like get into that feeling, right? If you need to.
I'd say it almost makes it worse. Like you can almost more easily fall into it because you have no real problems. So you kind of like, especially if you're somebody like into art or whatever, I wish I had some of those problems because I thought you had to have them in order to like create something, but I didn't. And it took me until, like my late 20s to understand that really, like you kind of live this fantasy, like this is what an artist is supposed to be. And I don't know. It just wasn't me.
I feel like at one point, fairly young, growing up on like grunge and that kind of stuff, like I sort of thought that like a pretty serious drug addiction was part of the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
And then I came to know some people who got super addicted to drugs, and all of their lives just universally sucked. There was no creativity to it. There was no anything to it. And you're like, oh no, actually, Kurt Cobain, or if you don't like him, pick somebody else, right? But they were just super talented and had this drug problem. Not that they were totally unrelated, but like he would have done something cool probably if it would have been maybe different. But he would have done something cool if he wasn't a heroin addict. It just would have been maybe a different flavor to it. Yeah, you don't actually need
catches up.
Yeah,
it catches up. Even if you, I mean, especially if you're in these circles, if you're in bands and stuff growing up, if you're just in the art circles, theater circles, and stuff like that. People do literally meme themselves, and this is even before memes existed, but they literally meme themselves into having an addiction problem or a drinking problem. I remember in my MFA, I met many people who were basically like alcoholics, but alcoholics because they thought they had to be in order to be, a great writer or something. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm being presumptuous of that, but that's the vibe I got.
That's the sense.
Where it's like... it was such a part of their personality, like, oh, look at what a drunk I am, that I was just like, oh yeah, like you're doing this as a performance that became an actual full-blown alcoholism, and you're suffering now.
Right?
Yeah,
and you give yourself a chemical addiction to it, right? Yeah. So sorry, you said you got out of your MFA how long ago?
2019 is when I graduated.
2019. Oh, maybe not even the last. That's after the last helicopter out of Nam.
Basically, yeah. When I started, it was right at the Great Awakening. It was around 2016 I started. And it was strange. There were and I wasn't full blown, I wasn't quite aware of how bad it was at that time either. And it was this kind of, there were things that would happen. There were jokes that suddenly weren't jokes anymore. There were these kind of things that look very uptight kind of feeling when you're in the workshop room or the classrooms, all that kind of stuff. Even more so than I ever felt studying the same stuff in undergrad. And that was only a few years previously, graduated there in 2014. And it was just, and I had unorthodox college experience. I went to a college, took years off, went, all that kind of stuff. Took me a few years to get through undergrad. I think if I had done it straight through, I would have finished in 2012, but I didn't. So I went to finished in 2014-ish. I don't know. It was just that great awakening happening where there's this kind of, it's a searching. I don't know why it happened exactly. Obviously we could point to things, and then there's people that trace the history all the way back to the 70s or something. I always wonder how helpful that is, when we go all the way back to 70 years ago where almost nobody was around anymore. It's just, okay, what are we doing here? Kind of deconstructing the nothingness. But I don't know. I mean, that's when it started, and it was this kind of, you could feel it. Everybody felt it. Everybody felt it in there. And really, I didn't even get that bad because I was not a retard, going in there. I understood what could and couldn't be said socially. And all those things. The worst I would get during that time, during the great kind of awakening thing, was usually accusations of misogyny. And that happens whenever, if you're a straight man specifically and you write about sex, you're going to get those leveled at you at any point now, even in the mainstream publishing and stuff outside of academia. That's going to happen, even if it's not actually there. It's a willful misreading of what's on the page. It's doesn't matter. But I saw friends have worse,
Really? Yeah. It was, I think it is, there's definitely not a clear demarcation line of when that all happened, because I felt like it ramped up. I had an unorthodox college thing too. I got a bachelor's degree, and then I went and got a second bachelor's degree in English, and then I had a year off, and I went and get my MFA. So I was a little bit, I don't know, I feel like probably the mean age of people starting an MFA is probably a little higher than the mean age of people starting a normal graduate program. I could be wrong about that, but it's felt that way.
Last I checked, I think it's average for most grad programs in general. I think is 26 is the average. So that would be, the mean. So just the most likely number. And it just so happens that's how old I was when I started.
Okay.
But
right
we had people in their 40s. We had people that were 22 right out on, any of that. We had a bunch of people. But.
Yeah, so there was a thing you could kind of see. I was, so probably my last year, I was probably, probably 6 or 7 years older than some of the people in the first year that were kind of coming through, and you could definitely tell there had been like a slight change in demeanor. It was a different approach to analyzing the stories, different sort of conversations at parties. The tenor of the conversations at parties had changed a little bit, and you felt like you were on your guard a little bit more. There was something, and I don't know if I've ever heard like a totally satisfactory explanation for it, except that maybe it is some kind of linguistic algorithm that just propagates, and ends up becoming something like self-reinforcing, and ends up just sort of passing through any system that will allow it entry to a certain degree. But
my theory is the lack of authority. And I know you and I have talked about this before, this kind of, because, and I know this sounds insane to people that aren't in the field, I know it. It's like, if you just look at the job posting, just go on higher ed jobs or any of the job boards in higher education in this specific field, although you can see it in any field. But in this field specifically, that's the one I know, that's the one I look at job ads for. Mm-hmm. There is a disclaimer that says, if you're applying for this job, we expect you to participate in dismantling the canon, talking about how racist the canon is, right? How problematic all these things are. And it's kind of like, that was the sole authority in literature. The sole authority in the study of literature was, this is the canon, this is the best works that we know of in the history of the English language, and even beyond the English language, because the Western canon extends well beyond that. But it's like, that was the authority. And so people that knew a lot about that had authority over literature. But now that we're dismantling that authority kind of benchmark, people have no idea what to do. So they're latching on to political authority, moral authority, all these other things that kind of, there's this weird thing in wokeness where it's amalgamation of all these different things like politics, morality, and this kind of weird kind of anti-sex thing, which is also kind of a Puritanism kind of angle. I mean, it's very strange. And for some reason, anime is tossed in there. I don't know. I don't understand why it's all in there. Yeah. But that's all part of it. And I think it's just the total lack of authority that people are just desperate to latch onto something. So instead of talking about the technique that this writer used, where you talk about how the way that they depicted women is problematic according to 21st century politics, not according to, early 20th century politics or 19th century politics or anything like that. Just because you can't, I don't know, we've taken the actual authority figure away and like given almost a free-for-all, but it's not a free-for-all. It's like a very specific thing. And it's this weird wokeness thing. And I know some people would be upset with me saying that, maybe not any listeners to this podcast, but I've had people that, comment on my things or whatever, that just don't believe this, just refuse to believe this, just to say that I'm making it up or I'm crazy or something. And I'm just like, look, man, like I wouldn't be saying it if I didn't see it. Okay. Like if I didn't see it, I wouldn't say anything at all. Like,
well, it's very difficult. I mean, this is the thing. And it's very difficult to see the outline of ideology, for lack of a better word, when it's the one that you're in and like part of and quote unquote believe in, right? So if you're somebody who's somewhat of an outsider to it, even if you have some degree of sympathy with whatever sub cause of it, but if it's not sort of possessed you can see it, I feel like, a lot more clearly than somebody who is the person who's like the first thing they go to is this writer or misogynist. They're not going to really understand that it's a sort of closed off system, right? They think that they're pursuing truth or whatever. And I'm probably victim of, in hindsight, I'll probably look back and be like, yeah, I was actually captured by some other like nuanced sub ideology that doesn't even have a name yet. But in 2030, we'll look back and be like, oh yeah, that's it's the this is water thing, right? Like what water you're in, you don't really recognize it being water, but. Yeah, I
blame Freud. No, please go on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's always interesting to me because I've been out of the academy for a while. Like 2013, I guess, was sort of my last time there, and so it's actually quite a bit of time. So I'm always kind of curious, like with more recent approximations of what's going on.
And from what I've heard, it's gotten worse. Yeah, it's only gotten worse. Yeah.
Yeah. Did they not know? Didn't anybody tell them the vibe shifted? Did anybody mention that?
Well, the vibe shifted on your personalized timeline, don't you understand?
Yeah, well, that's exactly. Yeah, for sure. And this kind of brings me to the point of like, okay, so I've got this podcast about books and literature. You've got a podcast about books and literature and writing. What do you think? Is this filling a new niche? Is this taking up the mantle that somebody else dropped? How do you think about sort of the phenomena, the fact that there are these a bunch of podcasts about books and they're fairly popular, but at the same time, overall literacy and reading is going down, right? How do you conceptualize that?
It's an interesting question to think about. Yeah, it's my theory on it would be yes, that the simple answer is yes, these podcasts are filling a void, a void that people are clearly hungry for, although we don't know the demand. Clearly there's not that much demand. Like, It's not like we're all getting rich off of this. Most of us are doing it for the love of the game. But I don't know. So it's clearly filling a void. But then the downside to that is that it is a free-for-all in terms of, there really isn't any standard or rigor. Not that everybody's doing this, but then you can listen to some of these podcasts or some of these niche things where they're really, you can say whatever you want. So you can kind of get focused. Because I noticed the ones that are the most popular, at least, are the ones that kind of follow the woke line, this kind of academic line. The ones that are the big book podcasts that, again, even probably most people listening to this don't listen to, right? I don't listen to them either. But, the book talk stuff, the kind of Colleen Hoover style romance novels, the self-published thing on that, those tend to be the biggest book podcasts. And it kind of goes along with the same thing. So are we really is there that much of a void? Apparently it's not that much of a void if we have a much smaller audience than these other mainstream ones. But it is still filling that void because, like, where are all these people going that are getting kind of not rejected but dejected, kind of from academia and kind of, I don't know, that they're coming to these podcasts because I mean there is a place where I just did the Magic Mountain a few episodes ago and stuff, like none of those book talk podcasts are going to even touch that, like they've never even heard of it probably. So it's just a matter of like what you want out of it. We're filling this void, but then we're also there is a lot of nonsense too. I saw it just this morning. People were talking about film, and again, I hate to bring up the timeline, but maybe I don't. The timeline is the thing. That's
how I know. That's how I know about anything that happens like outside of my house. So yeah,
where it was just like people kept talking about these kind of technical aspects, camera lighting, things like that, cut scenes, and all of that. But there's no talk about character, plot, all this other stuff that you can talk about. Why the technique is used, what the technique does for the film. It's just about pointing out the technique. And I was thinking to myself, it's the same reason that you have a problem with these kind of free-for-all, is that you can do anything, and it's easier to focus on, let's say, the political or moral aspect than talk about kind of the difficult craft elements. Same thing for film, TV, anything. Like, people would rather talk about the moral and political stuff because that is easier than having to make a judgment call. Not just a personal judgment call, but even an objective judgment call with when it comes to art. People don't like it when you can say stuff is more objective, at least from the craft perspective. But I don't know. I mean, and then you. But I mean, there are so many, you could go to whatever podcast you want. So if you want stuff like that, there are plenty of podcasts out there that do it. If you want something else, there are plenty of podcasts out there that do it. So, I mean, we are filling a void, but then it also feels like we aren't. Like the void is maybe shrinking as we're filling in. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. It could just be last man standing. Whoever does it for like 15 years is going to be the last one left. Like,
yeah, well, I mean, there might be some truth to that. I mean, I think I kind of realized, part of my, not maybe the reason that I started doing the podcast stuff, but probably one of my sort of latent motivating factors to kind of keep doing it is after my MFA experience. And I went to a pretty good program, and I kind of assumed I didn't assume I was going to like have a bestseller published, but I assumed that I would like get a job teaching at like Eastern State University teaching English 101 or something, right? Like
full-time lecturer or something. Yeah. Even if you're not tenure track, full-time teacher, something.
And man, I came out and 60 unanswered applications later, I was like, oh, I can't teach comp at like a rural community college in Oklahoma, apparently. So, what is that?
Unless you want to be an adjunct,
yeah. Well, I couldn't even get that. There were zero opportunities for me, which was I just thought was weird, and I thought somebody would be like, yeah, hey, why not? But anyway, but so this isn't to sort of bitch about that, but like I think part of the reason I do the podcast thing is like it's kind of it's like the closest I can do to that thing that I wanted to do, right? So, and I'm very much a screw it, I'll do it myself kind of guy. So. Right. I think it's that. I think this is like me trying to have some space for whatever egotistical reasons of ego or enthusiasm or however you want to describe it. I think this is sort of my version of having a classroom,
but absolutely.
But obviously not with the same kind of like, I'm not going to give anybody assignments. This is more about like enthusiasm and what I think's interesting, I guess.
Absolutely. And it is a way for people like us that when you're again like academia basically said we don't want you at a certain point, and I did it for 10 years. I was naive enough to keep doing it for 10 years thinking that I would get somewhere if I just kept doing it, and that used to be the case for the previous generation. A lot of Gen Xers gave me that advice, because that's what they did, and eventually got to like full-time or even a tenure track position somewhere basically. But you could teach for a living. You got to teach college for a living. And everyone says, oh, teach high school, whatever. It's not the same. It's not even close to the same thing, okay? Like you have much less control over the class, over the curriculum, all of that kind of stuff. Like it's just, more babysitting stuff because you have people underage. Like it's just not the same stuff. But whatever, not to disparage that we need good teachers, especially in high schools all over the country. But it's like, there's just no place to go. My theories were not getting published. My papers were not getting published. My creative stuff was getting published sporadically. I would argue for somebody coming out of grad school, and granted, I didn't go to Iowa or something like that where you kind of, agents knocking down your door to get your book out, but a pretty good resume for somebody coming out of grad school. And I was doing the same thing. It wasn't like I was applying to jobs that I was unqualified for, trying to be a tenure track creative writing professor with no published books. Like I wasn't applying for those jobs. That's ridiculous. And again, people that would criticize me for what I've said would claim that I was doing something that stupid or whatever. No, I was applying to the low level entry level stuff, adjunct positions and or full-time instructor or guest lecturer, whatever they call it. A bunch of colleges call it something different, but it's basically like, you're doing a 5/5 teaching load and you're getting maybe 40 to 50K a year. And that's at your standard kind of state school. I applied just like you.
The idea, you do that for a while, and then hopefully you'd get some publications, and then at some point something would open up, and you'd be qualified. You're moving.
And it's
along
at least
a
job. And I same like you. I was a couple years later. So if you were doing that in 2013 with the 60 some applications, I was in 2018, 2019. And again, I had great recommendations. I had a pretty good resume with a pretty lengthy list of publications for someone coming out of grad school, at least. Again, not like some people, but still better than average. I applied to over 108 positions all throughout the country because we were in a position where my wife and I could kind of go wherever the job was. Nothing. Not a single response. Nothing. Not even a call for an interview. Nothing. So that I did that for a couple years.
For me too. I did the. I say I did the 60, and I think one person emailed me, "Sorry, we're not interested." I think everybody else was just
ghost.
Crickets. Yeah. Very, very weird. Yeah.
And unprofessional considering what they make you do to apply for these kind of.
Yeah, I had to write a diversity statement for you people.
I mean, your teaching statement, your syllabus, examples of syllabi, and that isn't that hard, but it is kind of like it's more than most job applications because again, whatever. This is an elite job. Not everybody gets to teach college. Whatever. But I don't know. And I did that for several years. Nothing came of it. There were even when I moved to Vegas here, I was lucky. Well, not even the first year I was here, I worked in marketing. Then I got offered a job as an adjunct at the local community college, and I jumped on it because that's what I wanted. I wanted to further that part of my career. Did it for a few years. COVID really screwed that up. But then the same thing happened where I would go to these faculty meetings. I would go to the stuff. And there were a few older faculty on there that kind of tried to take me under their wing and would say things like, hey, there's an extra position opening up you should apply for. And I would do that. I would apply for these positions. I would put these people as references and stuff. And I would get nothing. Like, I'm a current teacher at the school. They know me. This, good reviews from the students and faculty and all of that, and then still nothing, not even a call for the interview or anything like that. Yeah. And it was just kind of, you do reach a point after 10 years where I'm just kind of like, okay, what am I doing? Well, maybe I could just do this on a podcast and fulfill that part of my life this way. And it's putting my face and name out there. Sure, there's a marketing angle to this, sure, but it is mostly, and I think for you too, right? Like, this kind of the passion that just can't be tamped down. Even if we have our day jobs that have nothing to do with it, there's just this passion that has to come out. And if it didn't, I think I would just explode or be an insane person on Twitter or something, even more so than I am, I guess. Or
Right. I'm totally with you. Yeah, it does come from like fundamentally an enthusiasm. I do kind of think it does make me, I never like to sort of say something's unfair unless, I know it is for sure. But it just makes me realize it's just like the demand for those positions far exceeds the supply. The other way around.
Reverse it, yeah.
There's way too many, there's way too many people who want those positions for how many of them that there are. And I think it's probably, if you're somebody who's thinking along those lines, like that lifestyle appeals to you, I think one thing to consider is it like sort of doesn't exist anymore, at least not the way that it once did, and that there are other ways to like get to there may be other ways to get to sort of a similar spot, right? So, not to necessarily think that, academia in the humanities is, on the business end of things, is sort of a pyramid scheme. You've got to keep these people coming in to get graduate degrees that they can't really do anything with. And the reason they keep coming in is so that so that there's paying tuition, and then you've got to hire. It's sort of a pyramid scheme in a way. Not that it was intentionally set up that way, but I think the way it's all incentivized, it's sort of how it ends up. I don't know.
It is interesting how, like, and this goes to a conversation you and I have had previously about kind of the people call it, the David Sachs answer or whatever, the All In podcast guys would call it the crumbling of institutions. But there is this kind, and maybe crumbling's a little heavy handed, but it is this kind of, the institutions aren't doing what they used to do, and people are noticing it. And I think academia, it's so kind of cut off from the rest of the world that people didn't notice for the first 30 years it was happening. But I always say, like, Gen X was the last generation to be able to do that path, grind out on that path, and eventually get a tenure track job or even a full-time teaching job. I had teachers even that I would talk to while I was in grad school that did that, didn't even have like a full published novel. They would have maybe a chapbook out or something, and they'd still be able, if you did it long enough for 10 years or more, like we were doing, like I did, you could work your way into somewhere. You could move to some, smaller city and work at a state school or whatever, and that's an okay living. But at least you get to do what you want to do, Right. You could do that. It just didn't happen for millennials. There were a few that could do that. Most can't. And I think that's happening in other institutions too, but academia is just like the biggest one that people see, and because of all the prestige that it carries, if you're tenured somewhere like Harvard or a prestigious school, you get a lot for that. But yeah, there's just this thing that's happening with the institutions right now where they're just not working the way they used to. And people talk about administrative bloat, and that's part of it. People talk about, the wokeness, that's definitely part of it. People talk about these kind of ideological litmus tests, which is really part of wokeness, and that's all part of it. Yeah. But really what it is that it's just they're eliminating tenure positions because they're expensive. So when a tenured professor retires, they're not filling that hole, that void left behind. Well, they're filling it with like 10 adjuncts that get paid like $2,500 for 3 months of work,
and you don't have to pay them health insurance or whatever.
Exactly.
You don't have to worry about what,
let alone a salary for life. So why would you do that?
So it's operating on sort of the same incentives that kind of everything else has, right? It's sort of like
and we like to think that academia is above that, like especially with all this stuff in politics with the Trump admin trying to cut funding and stuff for these prestigious schools, and they're doing it kind of as like a bullying tactic. Like I think most educated people can see that they're trying to do it as a power move and whatever. Like I support institutional reform, so I kind of have mixed feelings about it, you know, like I kind of support it, kind of don't, but it's also like there is this level of everybody's it's not working. Like we tried to do it this one way, and there was this deal that it was above like market dynamics because they weren't involved. They didn't have to, and tenure was a protection against that, and all of this other stuff. But then they became this big conglomerate of the market too. So it's all about cost cutting. It's all about bottom line. It's all about government funding. It's all about the endowments and stuff like that, and not about like kind of preserving the things that gave them prestige in the first place, which was like, at something like Harvard, like a first-rate education, kind of the classic books education you would get at Harvard or Yale. They would take this first-year course that was a year-long course where you went through basically the entire canon. I know at like Columbia and other places, they have the kind of great courses stuff, like the classic courses. You have to do a music course, just in order to graduate. At least you used to, but they're starting to eliminate that. So they're kind of tanking the prestige and relying on the reputation from previous decades. And I don't know, there was this idea that it was just separate from that it didn't matter if it made money or not. It didn't matter if it was profitable or not, because it was this thing outside of the market. And now it's just not. Like that promise has been completely broken, and it's so tied up in the market and the politics of everything that people feel, and it's just not working. Clearly it's not working. Sorry, I'm rambling about this.
And I wonder too, it's like how much better so I think you can see that an elite school, if you're thinking of college in terms of job training, that an elite school sets people up for jobs better at the end, not necessarily because of any educational content, but because Harvard goes on the resume, right? So there is a sort of return on investment in that. But I do wonder how much better educated somebody coming out of Harvard is, an average student coming out of Harvard versus an average student coming out of, I'm not going to say like the lowest ranked school, but a school that's more in the middle of the pack. How do you really compare those two? Is it dramatically, are you dramatically better educated in 2025 coming out of Harvard than, University of Wisconsin? I'm not even sure. I know that at those elite schools, it seems like every couple of months comes some incidents of like pretty massive intellectual fraud. And you're like, I don't even who are these people running this place, right? Like, there was a woman at Stanford just a little while ago. I mean, this was, I think, in the business side, but she got, I don't know the full story, but she got ousted. She was writing books on ethics. I think it was an ethics study she did, and she clearly had just fabricated all her data and just got booted out of the school. And I'm like, well, she's teaching at Stanford, right? And she's not alone. Claudine Gay, all these people. So you wonder, it's like, if you go through that system anymore, I'll grant you 2 generations ago it was a better education, but like in 2025, is that even better? I don't really know. I mean, would it be better if you got on YouTube and listened to some lectures and did the reading? Would you get a better education that way if you found a really good? It's possible that you might. You'd be missing out on the conversational aspect, but the core of it is the reading. So
that's interesting too. Maybe Harvard did it to, like, places like Harvard did it to themselves when they started putting all their lectures and courses online for free, so anybody could do that. Where it's a great idea. That's like the idea of the old institution, which is like for everybody, like a public library almost. Information for anybody who wants it for free. All you have to do is walk in or go to the website and you get it. But then they were, by doing that, they also diminished the kind of prestigious, reputational kind of luxury brand that they represented too, because now it's free to everybody. And of course, most people don't watch those lectures and get the free education. Yeah. But and I think that you got at that bigger point where there's fraud everywhere in academia, because it has kind of moved away from this. It's more about the market dynamics now than it was about this kind of, maybe it always was, and we're just being nostalgic or something for a time we didn't live through. But it does seem like there was a time where that wasn't important, and you would be held to account by your peers if you were doing fraudulent research and fraudulent papers. You would have a big spread in the Paris Review or something of people taking down your latest scholarship because it was just fraudulent, clearly, or it was false or whatever it is. And I know more about the humanities side of this than I do the kind of hard sciences side of this. But from what I understand, it's everywhere. The fraud is harder to commit in the hard sciences because you actually have to fake data. You have to fake the replication and stuff of these studies. In literature and a lot of humanities, and this goes for sociology as well, even though that's kind of a gray area in terms of it's a soft science that's trying to be a hard science, but it's not quite there yet, right? Same with psychology and some of these other, there are scientific elements there. You need to know brain anatomy, you need to know brain chemistry, all this kind of stuff, but then there's also just kind of, fluff bullshit that you can just kind of pull out of your ass. Right. So that's a weird, they're younger sciences compared to the other ones too. But, so, being fair, but humanities, it's just a lot easier to make shit up. It's just a lot easier to pull some personal anecdote and claim that that's what this writer was going for or something, or even, this kind of explosion in psychoanalysis. This is why I said I blame Freud for a lot of this, right? And that's expanded beyond the humanities. The people will just do that to you online or whatever after a comment. They'll just start psychoanalyzing you. They don't know anything about you. But this kind of psychoanalysis is easier than talking about kind of other aspects of craft and writing and kind of what gives something literary merit. So this is why people dismiss great artists and things now too, because they do this kind of psychoanalysis backhanded kind of thing where they pretend that, he described the woman's face this way because he hated women or something. It's this weird armchair psychologist thing where they kind of use Freud, at least his ideas, and they kind of... Academia did this in basically like the 70s where they pulled Freud's ideas out of psychology and started putting them into literary study. And it was just a huge mistake, in my opinion. Like, it was just a huge mistake. Like, it's led to so much bad scholarship where people are just making things up. They're just assuming, they're just putting their little weird association in there as if it's scholarship. And I'm like, well, what are we doing here? Like, what are we doing to, like, what's the point of literary scholarship? Is it just to feel good? Is it just to see yourself in the literature? Or is there something that we've always kind of looked for in it? And I don't know. I think that they've lost that too. Yeah, but I mean, there's fraud everywhere in academia. Like, there's just any of these conferences, go to a conference in academia in this field, in literature and writing. The panels are an eye roll. They're horrible. There's not any. I mean, one, they're all about like fat studies or feminist studies or some bullshit, though usually political, that they're pretending is literary. But then it's also just like people aren't saying anything. Like, you sit on a panel for poetry, and people are just talking about bullshit. They're just talking about like this trip they took with their parents, and they thought of it when they read this line. And I'm just like, okay, that's great. I love that you love this poem for that reason. That's not scholarship. Like, you're not contributing to the field of literary scholarship. You're just reading a book and enjoying it. That's fine. That's what you're supposed to do. But not here, not in this panel. We're supposed to go a little further. Yeah.
Right. It's taken the place of this other thing, and we're supposed to be trying to actually understand something and convey that understanding to a wider audience. Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, I read a fair amount of, I read for podcast preparation and stuff, I read a fair amount of literary journals, articles, on specific to topics I want to go. And I'm not just reading any one cover to cover. And you do kind of realize, like, you get into sometimes you get into, the 6th page of searches on JSTOR, and you're like, I'm probably the only person who's ever read this article. Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of them is just not geared, and I don't expect them to be geared for a popular audience necessarily, but I do sometimes wonder if so one thing I've kind of realized over sort of doing this podcast and thinking about how books and literature sort of interface the public, like, what's the point of any of this, right? Like, it's similar to the question of, like, what are you doing with literary studies, scholarship, right? And I mean, part of it is it's interesting because I think it maps sort of astride the current cultural divides, because there's a conservative element to it too, because it's this technology free sort of art form that I think goes fairly deep into like the human psyche, and not necessarily in a psychoanalytic way, though it could.
And it involves preservation, like naturally preserving, conserving. We could use that word, like historical text.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's also sort of like a lowercase p progressive element to it, which is like
Right.
there isn't like an empathetic quality to it, right? You're trying
Right.
to maybe like shine a light occasionally on social circumstances in order to sort of like make them better. You're trying to push the limits of and utility of language, right? So it's kind of got elements of both of these things in a way, and I'm kind of forgetting my point here. Oh, so I do wonder sometimes if like a lot of that scholarship energy could be better suited better spent like why did I think of him first? You know how like a guy like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who does a terrible job of it, but his job is to like popularize science. That's his sort of job. I kind of wonder if there couldn't be more energy spent like that on the humanities side, right? Of making it making it sort of cool to read, because I do think
Right.
it has this useful social function. Like, can't we spend less time talking about the way that Evelyn Waugh signed envelopes has something to, couldn't
Right.
we instead be sort of, here's why Brideshead Revisited is so great, and sort of shooting that at a broader audience. And maybe that's, I guess what my point is, maybe that's sort of one of the functions that this podcasting thing can do, is serve more of that function, instead of like, I'm not gonna spend my time putting together a podcast episode that's on the same subject that would get published in some third tier literary journal, just because I know it's already been proven that nobody's interested in that.
Yeah.
nobody cares. Yeah.
Well,
So
and I think you make the perfect case for why politics is a mistake if you're using that as your main reference, because like you said, you have these elements of conservation or conservatism, you have these elements of progressivism in this. It has everything in it. Mm-hmm. So if you're isolating out one or the other, specifically, progressive politics is the one that's being isolated out in literature right now. Like you're missing the bigger picture. You're missing the broader kind of human scale of this art form. Yeah, I think that we are doing that. Like, I think we are kind of spreading this level of not just enjoyment, but I think understanding too. Like, whatever, I'm sure you have this happen where whenever I like to ask guests, especially if they reached out to me to come on, like how they found this podcast or my podcast, and how they came to it, what sparked them to do it. And it's just interesting to me personally. And then there's just like, they all say the same thing, where they said that they liked that I said what I wanted, or that I said that like something was bad if I thought it was bad, right?
Right.
And I think even something like that, where like there is kind of a chilling effect in academia, where if you say that Audre Lorde is a mediocre poet, there's like gasps in the room, right? Like there's this kind of, and so you feel like you can't say it, and then I don't know.
Well,
and then there's this disingenuous thing people do where they say, that's fine. And then but it's not fine, like, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know in her case, I don't know Audre Lorde's work, but like,
you're not
there is a
missing
thing.
anything,
Yeah, well, there is a thing where the new canon gets, at least in part, developed by this for identity's sake. And so you saying you don't like a particular writer, it reads for some people as like you don't like,
Right.
fill in whatever their identity identity is, right? Which is dramatically unuseful and unnecessarily adversarial, right? It becomes this
not about the book, not about the
Right.
literature. It's about the politics.
Yeah, and that's hugely corrosive, and I think also like enormously. I mean, I can't imagine how many people have been sort of turned off by that. You get into, say you're going to be I'm trying to go to college, I'm going to be an accountant, but I got to take this literature course, and you get in there and it's just like all this nonsense about like how some 18th century novelist was a racist. They're like, yeah, I knew he was, but I knew he was before I came in here. What are you talking about? It's the 1700s, or whatever. It becomes, it's not doing, I don't think it's doing, for the most part, doing anybody any good. And it ends up being very one note too. It's like, well, okay, you can come up with this, so-and-so is a racist or a bigot or whatever, but it's sort of like, well, okay, then what? Not
Yeah.
Are we throwing the book in the garbage? Is that what it like? And we're never going to look at it again, or do we still have to reckon with it in some way? So,
and that's a way to, I think, avoid reckoning with great books, especially something like, the ones that are always, okay, Mark Twain, Huck Finn or whatever, Tom Sawyer, these kind of books that were always required reading. I mean, maybe like 5th grade. I think I was like the first time I was assigned like Huckleberry Finn, like something like
sounds
that.
Right.
Yeah. And it's just like we would always read these because we considered these great books, but now all of a sudden there's something that we're trying to hide from. You have to do these censored versions. You have to do these kind of certain words edited out. And it's not about teaching them the literature. It's about teaching them the current politics, which I think is where people get upset. But then, like you said, that people think that's all they have to do is just point out how it doesn't adhere to the politics, and that's it. They're like, well, that's the scholarship right now. And frankly, that is the scholarship right now.
Well,
so, like,
they're right. Yeah, they're
wrong.
not wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
but it's just
playing the game.
It leaves
that's
us
been
hanging.
taught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay, now what? So, okay, yeah, sure. Was he a racist? Yeah, okay. But what about this book? Like, what about this? Okay, we can agree with that, even if we grant this, which, I mean, most people do. Like, most people, there are some sickos on there that are trying to argue that, like, whatever, I don't know, that somebody wasn't really gay or somebody wasn't really a racist or whatever way back when there's some author, some artist, which is insane, right? You shouldn't be trying to argue that because it's insane. You don't know it. You can't prove it. And really, there's a lot of evidence to the contrary. But it's also like, it's just now you're focused. Now the other side, the opposing side, is focusing on the wrong things too. Like, you're focusing on the political side too, instead of focusing on the literature and on this and what it gives to us, what it brings to us. Even beyond technique and craft, it's that emotional resonance that I think is in which makes it difficult to talk about. That's a difficult thing to write and talk about, the emotional resonance, which is why I think people lean on kind of the personal associations and stuff. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it's a difficult thing to do. I'm not going to say it's easy. It's just, it's easier if you have a little bit of a guideline, like a rigor behind it, being like, this is politics, this is literature, here's where they intersect and overlap, and you can point that out. But if we're only focusing on one or the other, you're missing the bigger picture. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I'm totally with you. I do think there's a way in which this is sort of stuff that's kind of writ across all of culture, right? I mean, this is all tied in with. I think that we're now, like, a major part of the discourse right now is like on the nature and legitimacy of authorities of all kinds, right? So you just had, and I don't want to get I'm not gonna get too much into like specific political opinions, but like just noticing the culture. Just yesterday or today, maybe there's this No Kings protest, right?
I don't even know what that is, but I've been seeing stuff. Yeah.
I'm not sure either, but just sort of like semiotically, it's clearly caught up in this conversation somehow. And then there is the sort of the podcast circuit that's way bigger than you and I, who's super influential culturally now. And then there's sort of an opposing side that's saying, hey, those guys don't know what they're talking about a lot of the times, which is also kind of true, but we don't like them saying that because there's actually the people who are actually in authority have kind of dropped the ball on the responsibilities of that authority. So we'd rather just have somebody who we at least think they're telling us what they think, even if they're totally wrong. So there's like definitely this sort of chaos about. I almost wanted to say who's in charge, but it's subtler than that. It's like who has the legitimacy to say anything anymore. And I think, I don't know that the impulse people have is, I think there's an impulse people have that they want some degree of authority, and not like they don't want a daddy, but they want to be able to say, hey, I live my life this way. I'm hoping that somebody else has got their hands on this part of civilization, right? I know how to do this thing. Hopefully somebody's got the economy figured out, so I can, or whatever it is. And I think we're in a little bit of a crisis right now about this. Nobody really knows who to trust, and I don't either, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, the crisis of authority, it's almost kind of Ayn Randian, right? With this kind of, I'm thinking Atlas Shrugged in terms of, and I have opinions on Atlas Shrugged and all that, and Rand in general as a writer. But like, I think that the reason people flock to that story specifically is because like the main gist of it is people wanting the power that comes with that type of role, but then not wanting the responsibility of being the decision maker or the authority figure. So they're shrinking from the responsibility of the power that they hold, and that causes all these problems. Nobody wants to be the one that says no or gives a direction and then it's wrong, because then you get punished and stuff. Like, there is this level of everybody's too afraid. And there's interesting there's kind of leaked emails from the Meta stuff with Facebook. It was with Zuckerberg and I think Peter Thiel and a couple other board members, but apparently Thiel convinced Zuckerberg of this thing that was happening for Gen X, where it was this, like, Thiel has had this argument for a while where he says that the boomers were so reluctant to give up the reins, like to groom and have the Gen X come through, that they didn't let them take over naturally in their, like, 40s, where, like, the boomers would be in their 60s and the Gen Xers would be in their 40s, and they would slowly start to, retire or hand over the reins, somebody that you groomed or helped mentor or something like that. He said they just weren't doing it. So now you have all this. So he said, like, that was delayed 20 years. So now you have all these Gen Xers in their 50s and 60s finally getting that thing that they were supposed to get 20 years ago because the boomers wouldn't give it up. That's only going to be exacerbated for every generation going forward now. So for millennials, it's going to be even worse. Maybe we'll be in our 60s by the time that, like, Gen X is giving up their like roles of power and authority, and just the total lack of authority that we all that's left now, because it is a free-for-all, I think, is this personal authority. So people can do that through morality. They can do it through politics. I like to encourage people to do it, particularly in literature, through taste, what I call taste and judgment. So, like, and even then, because then if you make a judgment based around your taste and your preferences and all of that and what you think is good, like, you have to now defend that people view that as an authoritative statement, and it is an authoritative statement, but people are so afraid to be an authority of even their own opinions on something that they constantly kind of bend and break, and they hem and haw kind of thing. Like, they do this weird thing where and I just feel like Sunday, I've been thinking about Magic Mountain since I read that book, but my favorite line of the whole thing is form opinions. That's why God gave you eyes and reason, is my favorite quote from that, one of my favorites, where it's just like this is being alive, is forming an opinion on something you see with your own eyes that you witnessed, and then judging it according to maybe values, and you can get into the values and why you have them and what's right or wrong or ethics or blah blah blah, and we could do that, but it's just like make the judgment call and then stand by it. Like, don't be wishy-washy, don't be, and I know that's hard to do. Like, I'm saying it as if it's easy. Like, it's not easy. And everybody wants to pretend, like, this is why everybody says be your own person, right? Like, be your own person, don't listen to other people. But it's always just kind of more wishful than what people actually do, because we're a mimetic kind of species. We ape things we see. So, like, it's impossible to not be influenced by people around you. So I notice, like, if you spend a lot of time on social media, depending on which, platform you use, which circles you're hanging in, you'll start to speak like that. You'll start to make the jokes like that. That has its own language, its own way of communicating. And you'll hear it on podcasts and stuff, and you start to kind of mimic these things, and then you start to mimic the opinions and stuff. And it is difficult to take a step back and say, do I actually like this, or am I just afraid what people will say if I say David Lynch sucks or something? And I think that's a very real fear, but it's also maybe that's literature, right? That's studying literature. That's studying humanities in general, is you have to make a judgment call, and people are going to be upset with some of your judgment calls, so you have to kind of defend them, and that's a tough position to be in, especially if you're a public figure. If you're just some random person, whatever, you mute the thread, you don't care. But if you're somebody that's actually concerned with that and takes it seriously, that can be pretty hard to deal with. People say, have a thick skin. Again, that's hard to do too. People are like, well, you have a thick skin. It's like, okay, how thick is yours, motherfucker? Right.
Well, there's a thing. Well, and this is where that social media screws up with all of our sort of evolved capacities, because I think there's a reason, there's like a survival based reason why it hurts us to be like socially rejected. And to get socially rejected by a bunch of people, even if you don't know them, is like inherently pain. You can survive it in different ways, and different people are going to be better at that, and people who are like less agreeable are going to handle it better. But like, there is some counter in your head that's basically saying, how much do people hate me?
Yeah.
And if it gets too
that's
high,
the normal
it's
response.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I always say. That's the normal response. When you're getting dogpiled or everybody's coming on you in social media or something, the normal response is to be completely devastated and shrink into yourself. Like the abnormal freak response is to be like, I don't care. I don't care. It's like, that's what freaks, like weirdos would respond to it. You care, but you have to act like you don't, like kind of it's, so there's the performance of the internet, and maybe that has something to do with why we're so frustrated with kind of literary scholarship and the kind of the other institutions, is that the social media has kind of absorbed all of these other things. For like poetry and stuff, I always say like Instagram poetry has pretty much taken over all of poetry, and I think the Academy can be blamed for embracing that. So they're embracing this kind of awful low grade kind of beneath most like it's never going to kind of stuff. Yes, exactly. But they're embracing it because that's all that people actually read when it comes to poetry, except for a select number of few people like us, people listening. But we're small compared to the larger number of people that the Academy is trying to keep interested. And I think that's going to happen to fiction eventually too. You're kind of already seeing it with some of these, the Colleen Hoovers. Right now that's still in like a separate category in terms of that's genre fiction. Oh, that's not literary. People would say that in the Academy side, but it's happening. It's happening little by little. There's like little glimpses of what they call the outsider. Oh, I hate that term, the outsider or the alt-lit scene. I'm thinking something like Honor Levy's book and things like that, where there was a big push and it was published by a mainstream press. That was what I would consider. I would consider something like that basically Instagram fiction, and that's kind of the Academy and the institutions embracing kind of Instagram level fiction. So it's going to happen to all the arts. I mean, you're seeing it in movies, you're seeing it in all this kind of stuff, kind of social mediaification of the arts.
What is it about the sort of, and I don't expect you to like have a solid answer to this. I'm just sort of thinking about it. I mean, what is it about the way that things are incentivized now that sort of brings that stuff to the foreground? Like I remember, and you mentioned Colleen Hoover. I don't know enough Honor Levy, and I don't read that much like contemporary stuff, to be honest. I wish I read more, but I feel like I can never really form a solid opinion about anything more than like one book I just read. But that Colleen Hoover thing you mentioned is funny because someone close to me was in a ladies' book club, and they read Colleen Hoover, and everybody hated it, but it was like they were I think they all felt like they were supposed to read it somehow. Like somehow they got the information from the hive mind that Colleen Hoover was the kind of thing that they would like, and they all bought a copy. They all hated it, and then it just moved on. And yet Colleen Hoover's like a billionaire, whatever. I just don't understand. I guess I don't understand the economic realities that are sort of bringing this stuff to the fore. Like, do people actually like Rupi Kaur, or is there some like perversion in the algorithm that just keeps bringing it up because people have a peculiar love-hate relationship to it or something? I know this is kind of an empty open-ended question, but
I think it gets at this kind of how, what I always call it is the industry, at least the publishing industry, and you can see this in other industries, film, a lot of arts industries are the first to do this because they're kind of the easiest to do it to. That like we used to have what we would call these kind of tastemakers, and these used to be editors, agents in literature, these used to be producers, whatever, maybe even agents and stuff in film, whatever, where they were kind of these maybe even blowhard kind of hotshot people, but they were just like, they would find somebody and they would say, that's going to be a hit, like a music producer, a movie film, that's going to be a hit. I'm going to take this book, I'm going to make it a fucking hit because it has these elements and I know how to market that. And now, instead of these kind of tastemakers taking charge of the industry, they're kind of chasing trends, and they're chasing the algorithmic trends of TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Twitter is always kind of the smaller user base between all those. So it's really TikTok and stuff. They're chasing these kind of TikTok trends. So if something will go viral, and instead of either ignoring it or coming up with something to compete with it, they're desperate to chase that trend. Even if the problem with chasing trends now is that they can last 24 hours and be over, or they could last 3 years, or they could last a decade. So there's that too. So you're taking even a bigger risk as opposed to trusting your own taste and judgment about something like this. And I get it, the sales are down. You need to make the money. The industry's kind of falling apart, and it's not going to be so easy as like a hot shot coming in there and being like, I have better taste and is going to fix the industry. No, like we're beyond that. Yeah. You need like everybody to do that for that to happen, and that's
man.
not going to happen.
Chasing the trends in fiction to me feels particularly short-sighted, just because it takes a while to write anything halfway decent that's book length. And you're totally right. We're past like the news cycle. The news cycle is like literally there's bombs that fell yesterday, and I feel like we're already moved on to the next thing. You know, they're sort of write a book that's going to sort of like try to capture that wind in a bottle is sort of insane. I can't imagine that going unless you
harder
you get lucky.
to do.
Yeah, but.
And that's where Colleen Hoover comes in, because she was somebody that used the algorithm better than the industry did. And they rejected her until they realized they could make a lot of money off of her. And of course, all writers want to have that kind of relationship. They want to have their books put out by somebody. It's a hustle to do it on your own. So I'd take that if they gave it to me too, and they gave you a nice big check that they gave to her. I mean, good for her. I'd take it too.
Oh yeah.
So there's that angle of it. But yeah, I just like, there used to be, there was, even if they weren't actually, there was this idea that the people involved in these kind of arts industry, the corporate art industries, were trend setters instead of trend chasers like they are now. Like, where it's like, you used to set trends, you used to publish some unknown person that would just completely change the trend, and you would set the new trend for the next couple years or whatever it is. And then you kind of, if you're smart or you're good at that, you have an arsenal of young people that you've been trying to wait for this trend to happen, and then you put them all through and you make money off of it that way. Right. That's like, I mean, again, maybe I'm being wishful of that because I wasn't alive during that heyday, but it seems like most people that talk about it that were, kind of how this has happened. There was a lot more money.
Yeah. I've read enough biographies of writers to know that it was not uncommon to be sort of taken under an editor's wing and cultivated as an artist over time. Yeah, obviously you had to have something. You had to have some enthusiasm, and you had to have a vision and some talent. But like somebody would, and I remember, the first time, and this would have been over 10 years ago, the first time I ever tried to get an agent, I didn't, obviously. But one of the responses was, this manuscript needs a good editor. And I was like, that's what you're supposed to find. Like, what do you what do you mean it needs a good editor? It's like, it's like saying, I've got an entry-level job position, but you need to have 10 years of experience. Like, what are you talking about? Right. This is the relationship you're supposed to make. And I kind of realized that, like, they want the finished product, basically. That decision space between, we got somebody with talent and an idea versus we're going to turn this into some kind of enterprise that makes $1. They want that space to be completely shrunk so you can just step from one to the next. And some and that can work sometimes for sure, but you are going to be catching the sort of flashier, trendier stuff that way. That's the kind of fish you're going to catch with that net, instead of,
the worst experience.
Cormac McCarthy, they developed that guy over the course of like 20 years. Like, he wasn't, they didn't snap their fingers and Blood Meridian came out. Yeah, right. So, yeah.
And I mean, people talk about this with the music industry and stuff. Like, the record companies used to groom these young artists and then get them out and like maybe even manufacture a pop group or something to get hits. Like, we're setting a trend, or we're like doing this kind of thing, like a new sound, a new look, like that. My worst experience, I mean, this is partly why I've been going towards the Substack self-publishing route. And I want to have listeners, this is a little preview, I want to have Brad on my show. We're going to talk about this kind of stuff with his publishing journey and all of that. But yeah, like, I was emailing agents, and this basically what made me want to do it. I'm not going to say who it was, but it was a major literary agency in New York, all that kind of stuff. Sent it to them, and they actually responded, which is generous. Most don't even respond, right? So they responded, and the thing that said was just, he said to me that, I like this, but I'm being very cautious as to what I take on right now, and I just can't take it on. And to me, that's worse than if he just said nothing, or if he just said this sucks.
Just like, that's
I don't
worse.
Like it.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm like, no, because that was what kind of stuck the knife in me, where I was just like, oh, this trend, this fucking political trend is ruining everything. Like, my God, what are you so fucking afraid of? Like, and I know what they're afraid of. I know what they're afraid of. So I would try to say, I would try to market myself in the email as like, sometimes controversy sells books. Not even that it's controversial. It would only be controversial because of this stupid obsession that we're living through right now. It wouldn't have been controversial at all 10 years ago. But yeah, I don't know. But and then that's not enough either. So there is this kind of, it's very real fear when people talk about the chilling effect. That's almost more important than any of the actual punishments or any of the actual censorship. The chilling effect that comes after. But of course, it's harder to talk about because it's intangible. You can't point to evidence. You can't point to a specific thing. So then people don't believe you. I don't know, but I mean, I've seen it. That was just one, and that was a couple years ago. Maybe it's calmed down a little bit. Maybe I should try again now. But yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of fucking waiting, and frankly, they're probably going to say no. So why shouldn't I just hit the publish button on Substack? Why shouldn't I just do that? And maybe have a few less people read it, but more or less kind of the same. It's not.
I mean, the thing is, I think the illusion is you'd get a book deal with some major house, and then you'd sell millions of books, and in reality the difference between you doing it yourself and something like that is probably one order of magnitude is probably the difference. If you were going to sell 100 books on your own, you were going to sell 1,000 with a big publisher. If you were going to sell 1,000, you were going to sell so, which is a big deal, but it's not. It's not. You're not a millionaire. You're not. It doesn't. Yeah. There's there's only so far. Yeah. There's only so far it can go. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about your. We kind of talked about the canon, and I know you're a Harold Bloom. I know you're sort of on the Harold Bloom side of things, which I am too. Yeah. But what are some books that are in your personal canon? That,
personal canon,
maybe are in Bloom's canon, but are particularly of salience to you.
Yeah, some of them are obviously that overlap with Bloom, and Bloom's is more or less the Western canon too, although he has some disagreements with, but really his disagreements were with the kind of post-1960s kind of new canon, the kind of canon wars of the 80s and 90s, where we kind of tried the first kind of major war where politics became more important than the literature. But as Harold Bloom would say, we lost that war, so it's over. We lost. Then the canon is now going to be forever kind of open to mediocrity. But so my personal canon, one, again, people know Brad, people that have listened to Art of Darkness, Berryman, Dream Songs, that would be absolutely. And again, that's one that's in the canon already, despite people trying to disparage it and remove it. It's in there. So that's a huge one for me. I love Berryman. Is where I disagree with Bloom. Edith Wharton. Bloom was never an Edith Wharton fan. I love Edith Wharton. One of my favorites. I've read almost everything. I think I'm a couple books short. I have like 2 of her short story collections and then 2 novels, and then I could say I've read everything she's ever written. But yeah, I love that. If I had to pick a book, someone put a gun to my head, I would say Age of Innocence, her big, Pulitzer Prize winner. It is, that's her best book. It's fantastic. If you haven't read it, read it. What else would I say? I'd say something like Shakespeare's in there. Obviously, everything that Shakespeare is, there's a reason that everybody's obsessed with him, and he's such a huge figure. Personal favorites, King Lear is one of my favorites. Hamlet, one of my favorites. If we're talking comedies, I guess if I had to pick, I'd say Taming of the Shrew. A lot of people like Fortnite. I'm not a huge fan of, or Twelfth Night. Sorry, Twelfth Night. I
was like,
the internet. Wait, what? Yeah, the internet fucking internet coming in and ruining my brain.
Is that the one with the updated skins?
That's the one with the fucking fairy. Yeah, like the fucking fairies that are half the people are in disguise, and it's. When you're watching that play be performed, if you don't understand that half the characters keep coming back up in disguise, it can get confusing, whatever. But people like it, whatever. I'm not crazy about it. Vonnegut, got to throw Vonnegut in there. Pretty much anything. I've read almost everything by him, too. My favorite, Breakfast of Champions. Yeah. That's my little kind of contrarian throw in there. Everyone's like, not Slaughterhouse-Five. I'm like, well, I like Slaughterhouse-Five, too, but if I had to pick, I'd say that. Poetry, Allen Ginsberg. Hal is pretty much the best Allen Ginsberg. Elizabeth Bishop, her complete poems. I always say it's a little bit of a cop-out to do complete poems or whatever, complete works, but she was that good. You should read her complete. It's relatively cheap. You could afford it. That goes for Dickinson as well. Read everything. Again, Shakespeare, the sonnets, all of that. Read all of that stuff. love McMurtry. Love Larry McMurtry. Pretty much everything that you've heard about his most famous books, it's all true. Read them. They're fantastic novels. A little left field one I'd throw in there is Leaving Cheyenne. I don't know why, because I would say it's not one of his best novels, but for some reason when I read that at the time, it was just the perfect time for me. And I'm reading about these three characters kind of loving each other, and I don't know, I was just in tears reading the last couple pages. So that one always sticks out to me. But again, read all Lonesome Dove. All of those are fucking great.
I gotta take the McMurtry pill. I haven't read anything by McMurtry.
They're so good. Yeah. I mean, they're, and you like McCarthy, so they're in that kind of kind of Western Texas kind of.
I'm sure I'll like it. I mean, I remember watching the Lonesome Dove TV miniseries with Tommy Lee Jones. I didn't see it. I was too young to really know it when it came out, but I saw it years later and was like, this is really good. So I'm sure I would like the book.
He just has a way of writing about those kind of, I mean, I think McCarthy does this too, where he has a way of writing about these kind of backwoods characters that aren't as prevalent in the city novels that you get coming out of New York and stuff. And there's just a way that they write about them that is unlike anything you're going to read, anything else you're going to read. That is just so worth it. Yeah. And I would say that McMurtry, while he is literary, I'd say McCarthy definitely has that kind of flourishes in terms of language, kind of that literary kind of stuff where he definitely takes liberties, whereas McMurtry just leans more towards the pop side. Like, he wanted to sell books, clearly, but that they're still so good. Even the Last Picture Show and stuff like that. I know everybody, the movie, and all of that, it's good. The novel is so fucking good. It's so heart-wrenching. Right. When you read it, it's just so. I mean, Brokeback Mountain, this guy literally wrote the script because he was just so good at writing. He was one of two, I think, credited writers on it. But yeah, it's his, which makes sense. I mean, you have these kind of cowboys, kind of in this by themselves out there, and have this kind of secret of being gay or whatever. It's just only McMurtry could make it as tender as he did and make it such a hit because he has that so anything by him is fucking great. On. Franzen, I love Franzen. Corrections is clearly his best novel.
That's a great book.
Yeah, that's another one, The Last 60. Franzen was one that I didn't like when I first, everyone's like, oh, you got to read Franzen. And the first couple, 100 pages or so of the first, I think it was The Corrections was the first one I read, because everyone's like, oh, you got to read this book. And then I was like, I hate this. I hate this kind of 90s, wannabe DFW. Mm-hmm. And then when I got to the last 60 pages, I think I just read it sobbing. And I was just, I remember I texted my friend who I was talking a little shit because he was a big Franzen guy. And I was just, I take it all back. I was like, I take it all back. I was like, I get it. I take it all back.
Oh, man. I had a moment. So I was fortunate enough to meet Jonathan Franzen. And,
nice.
He came.
At UT?
At UT Austin, yeah. He was in town for something else. And he came and talked to us for 2 hours or something. And I just remember, and he, at that point he'd been on the cover of Time magazine, it was a big deal. Franzen was the biggest writer at the novelist at the time in America, I feel like. Outside of making that distinction between pop, he wasn't bigger than Stephen King. But I remember he came in and it was one of the coolest things ever, because at one point he said, I don't really know what to tell you guys for advice, because I kind of assume that you're all pretty talented and you kind of know what you're doing. And I was that was a real moment for me of wait a sec, wait, do I know what I'm doing? I don't know. It was very, it felt, even though he wasn't saying it directly to me as an individual, it felt like the first time anybody had bestowed some kind of respect on me. It was very, it was humbling, but also sort of encouraging at the same time. And I just thought that was really sweet that he didn't come in sort of I'm the boss of this whole enterprise, and I'm going to tell you how it goes. He was very cool. So that plus he's a absolutely brilliant writer. He'll always be in the good column for me. I
mean, that guy's literally I mean, some people have said, he's the best Gen X novelist? Probably is. Yeah, probably is. Yeah, probably. I can. Who's better than that from the Gen X gen? I don't know. That's yeah. He's pretty good. But yeah, and then you go technique. You can talk technique. You can talk straight story. You can talk complex. I mean, he is just so good at that. He's actually quite good at talking about that stuff too when people want to get into it. I should have. I mean, maybe I should reach out to him on the podcast. I say,
why not? I feel like he hasn't been making a lot of noise lately. Maybe a podcast would be just
maybe between his New Yorker appearances and his whatever else like interviews he's doing. Maybe he'll come on every
you never know, man. It's
true. You do never know.
It ends up being a kind of a small world for the most part.
That's what happened. I emailed Nick Flynn and he came on. Yeah, and I was like, oh, okay, great. Yeah. I was so fucking nervous though. Yeah, I was so fucking nervous. Where I was like, oh, this is one of my literary heroes. Like,
that's awesome. That's really cool, and that happens though, and it can for sure, right? Those people are out there. I was interested. I want to push people here as they're kind of winding down to definitely go listen to Heavy Board. Recently, the Magic Mountain conversation that you talked about with Maggie Zhu was really good. In depth. I feel like I haven't read the book. I feel like I kind of really understand it now. So definitely people go check that out. Also, the conversation you had with Jasper Ceylon. Tell me. I mean, I want to get people to go listen to it, but tell me a little bit about Jasper and like what he was up to.
Well, it's interesting because Jasper, that's one where that's a pen name for him, and I don't know his real name or anything. I don't know what he looks like or anything. He reached out to me, and I think he was reaching out to a couple different podcasts in this milieu, because obviously he's in the scene and stuff like that. And he wrote this basically like a parody or mock literary journal that he's selling on Amazon. Basically where he did these, and he's doing these kind of hoax poems where he purposely wrote these kind of ridiculous identity obsessed poems that were really bad and just comically bad and got them published, but he only got them published if he published submitted them under the the proper kind of identity name or anything like that. So which has been a huge scandal in literature, but he did it, and of course has gotten some hate on it and stuff like that. But that was very interesting because one, you're taking a risk to do that, but two, I mean, just what you're going to get for that. Like the industry does not want to hear that. And by industry, I just mean like the people in it. Like I've already seen, because I'm friends with him on social media and stuff like that. I've seen what he's been sharing of people writing about his kind of hoax that he orchestrated over 2 years to kind of embarrass these editors in these journals, and basically showing to what we were talking about, how there's really no authority apart from the political and the moral right now, especially when it comes to literature. They don't care about the craft. They don't care about what's actually on the page. They care about this kind of morality and the kind of political side of things, and usually left-wing politics, all that kind of stuff too. But yeah, I mean, that's great. Yeah, listeners should go listen to that because it is interesting, and it is interesting how it happened and why it keeps happening. And I know I see things, people talk about this stuff on like the right-wing art. There's this fucking obsession with it I keep seeing on the timeline all the time. And every time I see like some organization that is, vaguely associated with the right political spectrum, I'm just like, it sucks. It sucks, and it's the reason that it sucks. It's the same reason that the mainstream sucks, because you're too obsessed with this political side. That's why it sucks. It doesn't have anything else to do with it. It's that you're too obsessed with the ideological message being put across, which would usually be secondary or like a second or third order effect of the writing or the book or the poem. But now it's like the primary thing, and if you're doing that as the primary thing, it's always going to be weaken, the actual art piece. So you're sacrificing kind of depth and clarity and, just being good for this ideological thing. And it's just the same thing. If you're going to be a slave to this ideology, you're never going to get to what we're talking about here. Like it's too much, and that goes both ways. Yeah. So right now, the mainstream is too kind of obsessed with lefty politics, but the kind of countercultural stuff is way too obsessed with the right wing too. Like just like way too obsessed with the right wing politics.
Yeah, no,
and that's going to be a downfall.
It's like this overcorrection kind of thing, but I don't think it gets. And I shouldn't say. I mean, I don't read that much of the work, but I do know that it is funny when there's the flare-ups of like, you'll see the right wingers can't make art. All art is, and then a response, all art is right wing. You're like, man, both of these are absolutely moronic takes. Like, you guys aren't even. You're not even like. Yeah, it doesn't even make any sense. It's
in accordance with current day politics. They're using current day politics to talk about like Ezra Pound or something in turn of the century. It's like because he had a few like anti-immigration stances, but he was also progressive in these. Like it's more complicated than this kind of. Yeah. He was a right wing artist, or a left wing artist. It's much more complicated than that, and
frankly, more.
It doesn't even really matter. Yeah, it doesn't even really matter what like political leanings from 150 years ago. It doesn't fucking matter what the political leanings were.
Right. Yeah, I am sometimes sort of interested almost like anthropologically of like seeing like, because like I said, I've delved into a lot of writer biographies and sort of seeing how their perspective, political or social or whatever, sort of seeps into the work. But generally when it's like overtly shoehorned in, it's almost always bad. It tips over into some propagandistic realm, and it becomes tacky and weird and stilted and like and contrived, and it doesn't really do any good. I think it's better, if you do have some like political, like you think about. I think if there is some sort of like political cause or theory that you want to get into your work, I think the more subtly it's infused, the better. I mean, it should be barely noticeable. It should be like vermouth in a Manhattan or something, where it's just like barely there, right?
A little something to brighten it up. My personal opinion. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a little something to brighten it just a little bit.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, you can get definitely into dangerous territory, and you definitely don't want to. I mean, I don't know. People should do whatever they want, but like I definitely think it's.
But also do it with taste. Yeah.
You do it with taste. And I think it's you got to be careful about playing the algorithm game too, right?
Yes.
Like this is the algorithm. Yes. Well, it's like part of the art.
Especially if you're doing nonfiction, like kind of Substack commentary. I think it's very easy to get bogged down to the habit of checking the timeline every day and then writing toward the timeline instead of writing towards your interest or whatever's bouncing around your head. And I think there is something to that too, where like kind of writing and literature and art, like there's this feeling amongst everyone that it used to be better, right? It's kind of like a general vague feeling that people are constantly referencing and stuff, and I think there's some truth to it. But then the question becomes like, why is this happening? How did this happen? I think a lot of it has to do with the algorithmic obsession, where like now it's not like an artist's idea can be absolutely corrupted by what they see on the timeline, and they can chase that instead of chasing the vision that came into the head, or it just influences it too much, and you're kind of in this hollow state because it was algorithmically produced in your head. You're filling your head with all this algorithm, so it's going to be as disposable as the algorithm is. Is it disposable as the social media post, because that kind of corrupted your artistic vision in a way. And I think people are just a little too and I think that goes beyond art too. This could go through your political vision, this could go through your professional trajectory, whatever it is, personal life. I mean, you see people do this all the time in relationships, dating discourse. They'll literally break up with their significant other because of some fucking random forum that they read about how you're supposed to show love, and they notice that they don't do it that way. So you're kind of, I mean, this is the worst. I mean, the most insane time we've ever lived through is now. And not because of all the things that people say because of misinformation or whatever. No, just because people are too addicted to this kind of addiction software that does force your brain in these different directions, but really not even different. They're all kind of the same direction, because it's like I don't know, maybe like the computers, everyone's talking about AI. It's like, well, maybe the algorithms are more dangerous than the AI is actually. Like in terms of AI is pretty primitive compared to how everybody's thoughts are being focused right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and the algorithm definitely, I mean, it's tailored to you, so it's serving up it doesn't feel like you're being manipulated, but you're totally being manipulated. I mean, I've wanted to do this experiment with somebody, and I'm not suggesting you and I do it, but for years, I've wanted to do this experiment with somebody who is I'm fairly active on Twitter, you know, and I would love to just for a couple days trade profiles with somebody, just like see Twitter the way they see it, and they see it how I see it, and then just like talk about it afterwards. Because I think depending on the person, I think you could come up with very different perspectives on sort of the state of the world over the last 72 hours because of looking through each other's reality tunnels, as Robert Anton Wilson calls it. And I don't know how to break out of it, but it's there. Yeah.
I've even noticed it with like, you know, podcasts I listen to, writers that I like, where they kind of get stuck in it too. And I mean, it's not their fault. Everybody does this, but it's like they'll start talking about this obscure thing or whatever, some problem they're having in a group chat or whatever. They were talking with somebody, and I'm just like, that is kind of, I think you're talking about like the self-selection, like you kind of self-selected into this group and then this thing happened and they're all saying this thing you disagree with now. It's like, because I'm not seeing that. Like, I'm not seeing that on the timeline. Like, where are you seeing that? And you're like, I understand why you're upset about it and preoccupied with it, but at the same time, like, it might be about who you're surrounding yourself with, like, you know, like on these algorithm stuff.
Right. It might
especially with the For You stuff. On like these stuff, like I'm blocking or muting somebody every single day if you're using that tab.
Yeah,
like
no, I think the For You tab should be against the law. I think it should be illegal. It's a little bit of overstatement, but
the shit that gets pumped in there. Like I'm just like, why is this here? Block, mute, don't show me this. I don't like. I'm always just. So it can corrupt what you're thinking of.
Oh, for sure.
And then therefore, what you spend energy on. Yeah.
Yeah, it 100% does. Yeah. Well, tell me, Andrew, a couple others. So we talked about a little bit about the Magic Mountain episode that I definitely want people to go listen to. The Jasper Ceylon interview is, I think, very interesting. Even if you're out there and you think that project is Jasper Ceylon's project is like wrong-headed or whatever, I would urge you to listen to. it. You know, this is Jasper Ceylon's lived experience. So I think it's super interesting kind of what he did and what the results were. I don't have that kind of prankster, trickster energy that you would need to do a project like that. So it wouldn't work for me, but it's fascinating that somebody's doing it. But what are maybe a couple other episodes in the fairly recent past that you would recommend to somebody?
Yeah. So, I mean, we do all kinds of things, and usually I've taken to just following my whims. That seems to be the best way to go here. So even if I'm just thinking of something, I'll ask people about it, even though if they have nothing to do with it, have probably never thought about it in their life, whatever. Right. So I have a lot of interviews with guests and stuff like that. Most recent stuff that I've done, I've had, Magic Mountain, Jasper Ceylon, go listen to those. I did George Oppin's new collected poems with a friend, and actually I'm preparing to do at the end of this month, so this will be forthcoming. We're with that same friend. We're doing the complete Louise Glick. That's going to be a multi-part, so that's going to take a while, but we're going to start doing that in the next couple of weeks here. I've been reading it, and that Anne Sexton, we do like a lot of the Anne Sexton. Go check out that stuff. If you like poetry, there's plenty of stuff for that. Fiction, I'm trying to think of the most recent fiction stuff I've done. Besides Magic Mountain or something. It's so crazy how this works too. It works like art projects where you do it, you spend so much time on it, and then you completely forget like what it was, and you're like, oh yeah, we did do that. Yeah, we did do that.
I've definitely had that. I've had because I have a couple of friends who sometimes listen to podcast stuff I'll do, and they'll listen to something 6 months old, and they come to you and they'll ask you something about it. Like, I have no idea. What are you saying?
Yeah, like, oh, I said that. Yeah, I agree with it. Yeah.
I traded those neurons in for new ones. Yeah.
Yeah, the content must flow. Yeah. And then, of course, I always have author interviews and stuff like that. A couple of filmmakers on there. So, give it a listen. It's worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. And give your it'll be in the show notes too, but give people your where they can find you.
Yeah, of course. So podcast, easiest place to find me, patreon.com/heavyboard. or andrewwittstadt.substack.com. Both of those, you get the same thing. Essentially, you can join free or paid. And again, if you don't want to pay, joining free just helps me out. It helps support the show. You still get access to all the free stuff, and you just become a member. It helps. You can find me on social media. I'm at Andrew Wittstadt, at HeavyBoardPod on Twitter, at HeavyBoardPod, or at HeavyBoardPodcast on all other social medias, so Instagram, TikTok, Threads, all that stuff.
You're on them all.
Yeah, I just did Threads because I already had Instagram, and it just said you could just mimic, like, mirror whatever you were doing on Instagram, so I just do that with it. It hasn't really led to much at all. Threads is kind of dead on arrival. Yeah, you can do that. You can join free. We're on YouTube. That's a free way to support us too. Subscribe, like, share on YouTube at Heavyboard, at Heavyboard Clips. All episodes are up there on the Heavyboard channel, and then obviously the Clips channel just has like cut up stuff, which I've been slacking on, but I still have. There's plenty of stuff up there. But yeah, that's all that way. You can contact me, heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com, and all that. Awesome. Yeah, sign up for free or paid, anything like that. Yeah.
Right on. All right, Andrew. Well, this was so much fun. Thank you, and thanks for doing it a second time. I really,
of course, bro. Anytime.
And we'll talk soon. We'll talk back channel and collaborate again very soon.
Yeah, dude. Looking forward to it.
All right, man. Thanks. Everybody.
Have you ever heard about Willie the Weeper? Had a job as a chimney sweeper. He had the dope habit and he had his band. Listen while I tell you about a dream he had. He went down to the dope shop one Saturday night. He knew the lights would all be burning bright. Well, I guess he smoked a dozen pills or more. When he woke up, he was on a foreign shore. The Queen of Sheba was the first he met. She called him lovey-dovey and honey pet. She gave him a great big automobile with a diamond headlight and a golden wheel. Down in Honolulu, Willie fell in a trance, seeing the dusky beauties do the hula dance. His sweetie got in jail and Willie sure did shout when he got the news that she had wiggled out. He landed with a splash in the river now, riding on a sea-going crocodile. He winked at Cleopatra, she said, ain't he a sight? He said, how about a date for next Saturday night? He had 1,000,000 cattle and he had 1,000,000 sheep, had 1,000,000 vessels on the ocean deep, had $1,000,000 all in nickels and dimes. Well, he knew because he counted it 1,000 times. He landed in New York one evening late. He asked his sugar for an after date, started to kiss her and she started to pout when bang, bang, and the dope gave